welcome to Pioneer Parent Academy. I'm Laura Howard, Community Schools Coordinator, and I'm here today with several guests to bring you information about learning online. Our first guest is Mrs. Lisa Barber, Pioneer Virtual Academy Coordinator. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you.
So let's go ahead and get started. What are the virtual options available to students within the Batesville School District?
In grades K through 5, they only have one option. If they want to be in Pioneer Virtual Academy, then they are assigned a teacher that is a Batesville School District teacher, and then that teacher works with them through Google Classroom, with Google Meets, and uses Odysseyware. Grades 6 through 12, they have two options. They can learn through Edgenuity, an online platform which is self-paced, self-directed, or they can be a remote learner and have a regular BSD schedule and join those classes remotely from home.
So Lisa, what are the Virtual Academy guidelines for participation?
If a parent wants their child to be in PPA, then they contact me. I send them a form which they fill out online. And once I receive the form back, then I communicate with the principal and the school that they attend, and I make all those arrangements. The parent in the lower grades is a learning coach, and they're responsible for making sure that their student stays on target. And then in junior high and high school, most of the responsibility is on the student.
In terms of time and work, are the overall expectations the same or different than in-person learning?
For remote students, I expect that the time should be the same because they are in those classes that the students who are on-site are in. Of course, they don't have the switching of the classes and some of the other options, so it could be a shorter day, but generally it would be the same amount of time in 6 through 12. And then in the lower grades, I would say that the time is considerably less.
If a parent has a student that's learning online, how do parents track their students' progress?
In the lower grades, K through 5, that parent is in constant contact with the teacher because those students are assigned a classroom teacher. In grades 6-12, if they are in Edgenuity, then Edgenuity sends the parents a weekly progress report. And if they are a remote student, then they have the contact with the teacher and can always check Hack for their grades and assignments.
When students are learning online in the Batesville School District, does the curriculum focus mainly on academics? Or are other things presented to the student like social emotional learning, physical education, music, etc.?
The majority is on academics. In grades K through 8, they do have the option of art, music, and PE, but it is mostly academics.
Thank you so much, Miss Lisa, for the good information. And next we have an elementary teacher that is one of our virtual teachers, Mrs. Rachel Moser. Thank you so much for being with us today, Rachel. So my first question for you is, how do virtual teachers interact with students?
Teachers interact with students through Google Classrooms and Google Meets. They just know when to get on at their time, and we have conversation about the lessons, and if they're struggling through any lessons, I'll help them at that time.
How do virtual teachers provide feedback to their students?
The great thing about the Odysseyware is when a student is working on a lesson, they can message me through Odysseyware. They'll tag the lesson that they're struggling with, and so I can go into that lesson and then teach through a Google Meet that they're struggling with.
Great. So I'm sure from time to time you have students that are struggling with a particular skill or content. How do you assist those students that are struggling with that learning from the virtual platform?
Okay, so I have done that in two ways. One way is to teach a live lesson with the student, one-on-one. The students have gotten really good at navigating through the system, so they also know how to share their screen with me now through our Google Meets. And so we can look at the lesson together. And another way I've done that is I've just recorded it on Screencastify and done the lesson with a whiteboard, and then I can email it to the student and the parent.
Same as the regular classroom teacher, I'm sure you've experienced some behavior issues. Can you tell us how those are addressed for students that are learning online?
I really didn't have a lot of behavior issues. Really, if you're talking about through a Google Meet, a behavior issue may be talking over the teacher or talking over other students. And so the conversation was had of, if we were talking through a telephone, it would have to be one at a time. And so just setting those guidelines or those norms of raise your hand, give me a thumbs up, give me a thumbs down, I'm not sure.
What advice would you give parents of elementary students that are considering having their child learn online related to parents being the learning coach?
You're coaching your child through these lessons, and these lessons are not easy. It's not a cakewalk for them, and so they need some guidance in just how to think about the text, because that's what we want to teach in the classroom is teach our kids how to think about the text and how to get these answers from the text. So it's extremely important for parents to understand they are the learning coach and they need to be there and help their student walk through these various lessons in English and reading and math and science.
What are some of the most important Google tools that elementary students need to be proficient with to be successful as a virtual learner?
Definitely email. Kids need to go to the waffle up in the top right hand corner, check your email because I'm going to send you messages, and also just Google Classroom. So the main two resources we use through the Google Suite is going to be our email accounts and our Google Classroom with elementary students. The Google Classroom is essential because that's where we do our Google Meets.
Thanks so much, Miss Rachel, for this valuable information for our elementary students and their parents. And next we'll be having Miss Julie Berry, a high school teacher, bringing her perspective of learning online. Thank you for joining us today, Julie.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So you are a high school teacher who is teaching students who are actually in the classroom in addition to students that are remoting in. Is that correct?
Yes. So in my classes, we have in-person students and we have students on the Google Meet at the same time.
How do you interact with students that have decided to learn online?
The primary way that I interact with those students is through our scheduled Google Meet that occurs during their normal class time. So when it is time for their class to start, they'll open up their Google Classroom, and there'll be a link at the top of their classroom that opens their Google Meet. And that's where all the students join at the same time as the in-person students begin class. And so we communicate that way. They will watch the lesson, they will work on the assignments that we're working on in class. And one thing that's really wonderful about the Google Suite is that when their assignments are on a Google Doc or a Google Slide, they can be working on them at home, and I can still see their answers from my computer while they're working on them. And so while I'm providing feedback to the students in class, I can also check on the work from my online students and provide feedback to them as well.
How do you assist students that are having trouble with content or a skill?
The remote students are given feedback in the same way that the in-person students are during class, but they also can schedule additional Google Meets with me during other times of the day or whenever they are available and I'm available, and I usually just ask them to send me an email and let me know, hey, can we get together for a Google Meet to go over this one more time? And I'll always schedule those additional Google Meets with them that would be similar to a student coming after class or before class for additional help.
What advice would you give parents of a secondary student that are considering having them learn online related to being an independent learner?
So I would always encourage the parents to consider and talk with their student about if they are willing to apply the discipline that they need to apply to continue their education and to be willing to reach out to the teachers, to ask for additional help and communicate with the teachers, because many students struggle with that motivation or they're afraid to ask for help and they can be falling behind, and it's harder for the teacher to recognize when the remote student is falling behind when they're not seeing them every day.
How important is it for a student that's learning online to create a schedule or map out their assignments?
Just as important as it would be for an in-person student. They will follow the same schedule as they would if they were at school, and they need to keep up with their assignments that they need to finish at home for homework, that tests that they need to study for. So the same advice I would give to an in-person student about keeping a planner to keep up with when you have upcoming due dates and upcoming tests, I would give the same advice to our remote learners as well.
What are your thoughts related to online learners for organization and creating a learning space?
When the students are just laying in bed or lounging in their PJs, it can be harder for them to feel like they're at school. And so if they have a set space where they can sit up, they can stay focused on the class, that is their learning space, then I think that genuinely helps the students stay disciplined and motivated to do their work while they're at home.
What are the most important Google tools that a secondary student needs to have control of to be successful if they're learning online?
Google Classroom and Gmail would be the top two. With Google Classroom, that's where they'll find their assignments each day. That's where they'll access their Google Meet to listen to the teacher's lesson and provide conversations with the teachers as well. And then Gmail is where they will also communicate with teachers and send an email and ask for help. The teachers may send them an email to remind them of missing assignments. And if they can keep up with their Google Classroom and their email each day, then that's a great place to start for those students.
Do you have any other information that you'd like to share with us?
I would just like to remind the parents that at the secondary level, the variety of classes is quite extensive. And so my science class may be held very differently than a remote course class or agriculture class. So if the parents feel like they don't quite understand what the teacher is expecting of their student, please just email that teacher and communicate with him or her, and they will be able to answer your questions for you.
Thank you, Ms. Berry, for joining us today. The information you shared for parents as they're considering having their students learn online is so important. So this wraps up our video for today, but I want to remind you that you have heard both educators mention about different Google tools students need to be proficient with. And you can get more information about those Google tools in the comments below or by accessing them on our Community Schools Model website.